This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to Disabled Persons Assembly's Notable Radio Show. DPA is a systemic advocacy organisation run by and for disabled people. DPA is a pan-impaired organisation with members across the country. Over the next half hour, we'll discover how we can work collaboratively to achieve inclusion for all New Zealanders. DPA's Notable Radio Show, a whole new attitude.
Kia ora, my name is Amy Taylor and I'm your host on DPA's Notable Radio Show. Today we're going to be looking at how disability is represented in children's books. Kids' books can be a great way of introducing disability to able-bodied children, to normalise disability for all children, and to make disabled children feel included. The books that I have in front of me, I've got a pile, but they're all from my own collection. So I apologise in advance in that they're not particularly representative of all disabilities because they are the books that I've literally taken off my daughter's shelf in her bedroom. So they're the books that I have chosen to help my children understand disability in the context that it affects our family. So there are a few more books about hearing loss. There are books about physical differences. There are books about mobility aids in these. There are no books about vision impairment in my collection, and I don't have very much actually on neurodiversity in my collection, although perhaps that's something I need to look into. So I've got a pile of children's books in front of me. They're all picture books and they're all beautifully illustrated. Just lovely books just to share with your kids. They're not... they don't lean so heavily on the themes of disability that they're dry. The first book that I have in front of me is actually by a New Zealand author who has spina bifida, and she was inspired to write this book by having her first child. So her name is Christy Tekerua, and her book is entitled Mummy Has Wheels. And this is a very simple picture book for a very, very young child to understand and normalise the concept that some parents use wheelchairs, but having a disability doesn't actually stop you from being a good parent. And it's a lovely, inclusive story in the typical really early reader fashion where there are just a few words on each page. Some beautiful, bright illustrations by Michelle Kirk. This is a great way to introduce your infant to the concept of disability and why mummy might look different from other people's parents. And we can use these books not only with children whose parents do actually have a disability, but we can use them in a playgroup or nursery setting where the child can actually be familiarised by the fact that some parents do look different and maybe they're mobilised differently, but they're still really good parents, and that doesn't take away from their love and cherishing and caring of a child. So that's a beautiful, beautiful story, and it's lovely to have a New Zealand author who is actually approaching these somewhat difficult topics in children's literature. So well done, Christy. I really appreciate your little book. The next book I have in front of me is by a very, very well-known international author, Julia Donaldson. So Julia Donaldson actually works really closely with the deaf community. And so she has two books that I know of, maybe there are more, two books that centre around deafness. And my favourite of the two is called Freddie and the Fairy. And this is illustrated by Karen George. And the story follows a little boy who happens to summon a fairy. But the fairy experiences hearing loss. And the fairy offers him some wishes. And he attempts to wish, but the fairy mishears him. So Freddie thought and then mumbled, "I wish I had a pet." "And so you shall," says the fairy, and summons up a net. So it's a lovely rhyming story. But the theme is about acceptance and patience, and actually covers some really basic tools that you can actually use for communicating with people with hearing loss, and that you can teach your children about. So it says, Rule 1, you mustn't mumble or don't turn away because the fairy needs to see your lips. Don't cover your mouth. And obey these 3 rules and the fairy will understand you. So really basic rules and guidelines for speaking with people with hearing loss, and in a beautifully illustrated little story in true Julia Donaldson fashion. So Julia Donaldson is the author of The Gruffalo and numerous other extremely successful children's stories. So I absolutely love that, and I've read this to my children so many times I can't even count. The other one that Julia Donaldson has written with the deaf community is a book that was written in collaboration with deaf children, and it's based around UK Sign Language. So it's called What the Jackdaw Saw, and it was illustrated by Nick Sharratt. And these are ideas that the children themselves have brought forward to actually include in this story. And the story follows a jackdaw flying around, and all the creatures that the jackdaw sees sign to them. All the animals that the jackdaw sees are signing danger because the jackdaw is heading into a storm. And it's just beautifully illustrated. And at the end, it gives you a summary of some of the signs that are included in the story, and the children are illustrated. Some of them are illustrated wearing hearing aids and cochlear implants, which again is a really inclusive way of illustrating a book, is just having children using some aids in the story, which will, when read by disabled children, it allows them to feel included. And there's also a picture of a child using a wheelchair in this book. So that's another beautiful Julia Donaldson book. Highly recommend getting these books because the illustrations are just absolutely stunning, and the rhyming, they're just very catchy books to read to your children, enjoyable books. Along the same lines, there's another really popular children's book that I happen to have in my collection, and it's called Giraffes Can't Dance, and it's by Giles Andrea and Guy Parks Rees. And this is an international #1 bestseller. Many families will have this book in their collection. And while it's not explicitly about disability, the story follows a giraffe who is extremely clumsy and awkward and has these really skinny legs, and all the other animals bully and mock the giraffe because he attempts to dance, and he doesn't actually have much in the way of rhythm and grace. And towards the end of the story, it's pointed out to the giraffe that he can actually dance, and he dances in his own way, and that is special and unique, and that we can all take part and enjoy ourselves whether our bodies are different or not. So that's the overarching theme. And the animals come to accept that Gerald the giraffe has a different way of dancing, but his different way is still beautiful, and they enjoy watching it. So he dances to his own rhythm. And I think that it's a really good theme there for disabled children to know that however they move their bodies, that it's absolutely wonderful and acceptable, and they shouldn't stop enjoying themselves and doing things they enjoy because they move their bodies differently from other children. So I think that's what the general theme of this book is, and it's a lovely, again, beautiful illustrations and catchy rhythm, which young children really enjoy. So these books are that we've covered so far can be read purely for enjoyment. They don't have to be educational, but there is an underlying sort of educational message, which I really like the way that can be done. The next book is more outrightly about disability and less, it's less overshadowed by a sort of catchy story, and it is actually about a child rather than about mythical creatures or animals. So this is also a really popular book, a bestseller as well, and it's called What Happened to You? And the author is James Catchpole. And James Catchpole is actually the author himself, is an amputee. So he writes this book to sort of educate parents and children about how to actually approach and deal with children who look different. And while it is a more direct book in a sort of educational sense, it has a really kind of good overarching message about play and enjoyment. And so the story goes that there's this little boy, and he's a single leg amputee, and he's in the park and he's playing, and these other little children approach him and they say, "What happened to you?" And he makes up that he's been bitten by a shark because he doesn't actually want to share his private medical information with a whole bunch of strangers. And why should he, is the overall message. So he tells them he's been bitten by a shark, or that it was 1,000 lions. And actually, he doesn't have to share that information. They can accept him and play with him without needing to know what exactly happened to him. And if that he doesn't want to share that information, he doesn't have to, but he still needs to be accepted. So, and it also, there's a section in the back of this book which gives you, as an adult, a list of suggestions on what to do if your child wants to know everything about a disabled person they see all at once and at top volume. I think we've all had this experience of a child who, if you are a disabled person who's visibly disabled, sometimes children will voice their curiosity in a way that's quite embarrassing for the parent. And this is the suggestions from this author who is an amputee. So he says, don't panic. You don't make it worse. Your kid's already awkward. Have a calm, matter-of-fact tone. Answer simply and generally. Say things like, yes, some people only have one leg. Some people use a wheelchair or move or speak differently. That's okay. Disability is normal. Educate generally. Some people use a wheelchair if their legs don't work so well. Some people are born without a leg, and some people lose it in an accident. It's good to be curious, but you don't know this person, and it's okay not to know exactly what happened to them. And it's not really polite to ask personal questions. Manners, for one thing, but also empathy. Just imagine how boring it would be for a disabled person to have to answer these questions all the time. And if it's too late and your child has already popped the question directly to the disabled person, you can be fairly sure that the disabled person has dealt with this scenario 100 times before and has a way of handling it. Yeah, we all have ways of handling it. Some of us handle it better than others. I'm generally fairly accepting of questions from young children. I think that natural curiosity is actually something that we should foster. And I find that if you give children a reasonable, direct answer, they generally are pretty accepting. In fact, even more so than adults. Sometimes adults are rather cynical, whereas children tend to accept, and we like that from them. So the next book I have in front of me is called Hello, Everybody. And this book centers around in bodily differences and how our bodies can all be different, but they function and they provide us with wonderful ways of living, and that's all super fabulous and unique. That's the general theme of this book. And this is a difficult book from the perspective of it's an important book, but it's also, it covers things that you might not necessarily want to have as your bedtime story for your child, because it's quite confrontational and there's full frontal nudity in this book. I think it's a good book for questions that your child may have. If your child can page through this, they can ask you questions in a safe setting, which, going back to the previous book where we talked about how you can really make disabled people's lives difficult by asking them questions in perhaps not the best context, this book allows children to ask those questions in a safe space. So it talks about how all bodies are different. Bodies come in different shapes and sizes. Skin can be different. Some people have pimples and dimples and wrinkles. Some skin is oily or splotchy. Some skin has different markings. And some of those markings might be cultural. You can style your hair like you like. Some people have hair in all sorts of different places. Faces are unique. Some people have ears, could be small or long, or maybe even they use hearing aids, or maybe people are proud to be deaf. It talks about genital differences and intersex. It talks about colonoscopy bags, which is a topic that children may not understand at all. It talks about mastectomies and how somebody may only have one breast. It talks about limb differences and why people might use walkers or wheelchairs, and how limbs can be made out of different things. Some of them are made out of metal or silicone, and that's okay. And it also talks about how bodies will change, which I think is a really good message, is that our bodies don't always stay the same. As I said, it's not necessarily the easiest read with your children because some of the topics are quite confrontational, but I think it really is important that we speak to our children about how bodies can be different, and this is a really good platform for that. My mother-in-law gave it to me, and I was really surprised on how sort of accepting my children were, actually, despite some of the quite confrontational imagery, like genitalia. The children still were interested but accepting, and that was really great. So the last book that I have in front of me, excuse me, is was written around COVID-19 by the author Michael Rosen, who I believe has other books as well. This book is called Sticky Mix Stick. And Sticky Mac Stick is the friend who helped me walk again. So the author, Michael Rosen, was struck down with COVID-19 and extremely, extremely ill, and placed in hospital on a ventilator, and basically had to regain all their function after that. And so this book focuses around his stick, and it's a very positive message about mobility aids, that mobility aids are helpers. They're not something to be embarrassed or shamed about, and that they can be really, really helpful. And he builds this fabulous relationship with his stick. Well, firstly with a wheelchair. And he says, I like the wheelchair. I wheeled it round the room and the corridors. And he talks about how tired he was and how difficult the recovery process was. And I think this is a really valid book for any child experiencing loss of function or disability or going through a long hospital stay. And he talks about the physiotherapy that he did. And a few days later, I'd given up the frame and I had to use a stick. And he talks about how he was scared to rely on a stick. And he talks about the rhythm that he learnt and how his relationship with his stick was actually a positive one. And he did have to give it up eventually, but he talks about how he took it home with him, and he keeps it because he's actually quite fond of it now, and it's really beautiful. As the stick has become a symbol of his recovery process. Sticky Mac Stick sits in the basket by the front door just in case I need him. I often look at him on the way out and think of the time he helped me learn how to walk. You see, an absolutely fabulous positive message about mobility aids, which are often something that we as a society fall into a trap of thinking very negatively about using mobility aids. And Sticky Mac Stick is a book that really tells us that we can look at mobility aids in a positive way. So those are the books that I have for you today. They're all children's picture books, all fabulous for young ages, and actually sometimes slightly older children can learn from these messages as well. So I thoroughly enjoyed having a look through my children's book collection for today, because I think that it's really important that we use books as a way of normalising disability. So this has been DPA's Notable Radio. I'm Amy Taylor, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.
Disabled Persons Assembly is Aotearoa, New Zealand's first pan-disability national organisation, providing system-level advocacy for all disabled people. Membership is free for individuals. If you'd like to know more, visit our national website at www.dpa.org.nz or contact your local kaituitui or community connector, Amy Taylor, at kaituitui.otipoti@dpa.org.nz. Disabled Persons Assembly, a whole new attitude.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.